Welcome back to the video and welcome back to Rikka's Theorycrafting. This time today we are going to be talking about the main deck size within Shadowverse Evolve and seeing if the main card curve actually matters within the game. So to start off, I would like to go explain the deck rule within main decks within Shadowverse Evolve. Usually your main deck revolves around a range of 40 to 50 cards, with your evolved deck being locked at 10 cards. So this basically means that you have the flexibility to go up to a higher count within up to a maximum of 50 cards or a minimum of 40, and you can go, of course, be within the range between 40 and 50 as well. So I mainly usually talk about this because there's a lot of things to consider, because deck size variance is a very interesting topic. Seeing people deck build overall is really interesting, and this is a bit of a follow-up for a previous video that Twintail actually did within the channel talking about how to deck build. So this is a bit more of some advanced stuff to consider when going into your own deck building. So there are three things that you want to definitely consider when doing deck building and thinking about how much numbers you want to put in your deck. The first thing is, do you have draw engines within your deck? What I'm basically talking about as this right here is one of my theory crafting decks for fairies. This is a bit of a mid-range deck. So I still have basically my main draw engine, if you all know of Harvest Festival, Ancient Elf, and Nature's Guidance. Basically, I've already talked about this on the previous video about Rhinoceros, but as this being one of my decks that I tested within the locals, this doesn't really focus on the draw engine, but the main reason why I added still the draw engine is because it's still very good to have within a deck like this, and it takes advantage of something that I wanted to consider within the ratio, which is around 40 pieces. Now, I'm not going to be speeding through a lot of my deck, so noticing some of these pieces, the only other thing is that despite having fairy generators, we also want to take advantage of trying to go get some of our key pieces like Archer, like Noble Fairy too as well, and really, of course, our main engine, which is Rose Queen. So that's why I like having on this as well. And what's also great about this is because I can ditch this at any time. So this means that I'm okay with potentially not having to deal with deck out watch, which in some decks like Dragoncraft, which can speed games longer, my deck is overall trying to play a bit more of a tempo style rather than mid-range, but it's not going to go all the way down to potential deck out. So that's why I kind of have some areas where I don't need to go pop my draw engines, but it's definitely something to consider because having your main curve be at low 40, which is pretty good overall. I always have it as a heavy recommendation. There are times where people just go thoroughly stall at the game and you could get to your 40th card and lose via deck out. So that's one thing to definitely consider when you are building within your deck. Am I drawing too deep enough, or do I have a good amount of risks too as well, where I could super draw my deck and I could still not get into deck outs too as well, since there's no we put back into deck types of cards in this game so far. The second thing I would like to consider is, do you have consistency within your deck? So I'm going to show you all a deck right now, which is a Runecraft deck by someone named Saya TCG on X, and I would like to just give a shout out on this because this is quite a risky deck overall. You can all see the big number over here, which is 50 cards at the maximum too. I've actually not seen that many 50 card decks overall, or at least going up to maybe around like 49 or even 48. So this is pretty much a ballsy use of this, but there is a reason why Runecraft can possibly do this, is because of this specific card named Merlin. This card on Fanfare can search your deck for a spell, reveal it, and add it to your hands. And considering with 19 spells within the deck, you have a lot of good search outs too as well. So you can definitely see that this is a bit of a thorough risk deck, but overall it is good to have this nice consistency, because being able to go pull a card basically at will means that you can take advantage of your main heavy curve that some people like to do on it. The main recommendation we usually see for high curve decks is around like 45 to 46, even possibly lower, around like the 44 mark too as well. So that's something to definitely consider within the main deck use. And as you see, there's a lot of different flexibility that this deck can go provide. So it's great to have some thorough consistency pieces, not just within Runecraft, but there are other examples too. Look at Swordcraft, where Gemstaff Commander has on fanfare, search your deck for a Swordcraft follower, reveal it, and add it to your hand. Also in Swordcraft, you also have the Evolve version of Mage Leader. You can search your deck for a follower, evolve, reveal it, and add it to your hand. So I definitely think that the main ones of being Runecraft and Swordcraft are great with having a lot of consistency. So that's why you can see some Sword decks or some Runecraft decks build a very higher curve. So that's something to definitely consider when you want to build decks. Is if I have the consistency and can just grab pieces at will, I don't really need to have a really small deck size too, because I'll need to go bank on having a smaller curve to go draw. And that's the last thing I want to go talk about within the deck size variance is odds. Now, this game has a lot of different probability, and it's one of my favorite subjects to talk about within Shadowverse Evolve. Usually, the range is always people talking about, do I have to go towards a lower end where it will be easier to draw, or can I go at a bigger end relying on stuff like consistency or just playing like a lot of flexibility usage and such. A good example of this is actually my first deck that I took to locals, on the first ever locals that I had. I actually had 42 out of 50. Now, there's definitely a big negative about this, is because I was playing 14 cost 1s and 15 cost 2s, but going aside for that, I definitely changed it out and it did not work for me. But the main concept is that I had 2 extra pieces and I decided to add, I'm trying to find the card. I think I decided to add in Rose Queen. Now, this was a last-minute change, and this was a bit of a risky change that I probably should have not done. But the reason why I have Rose Queen is because I'm really taking advantage of stuff like having Blessed Fairy Dancer, basically having like a fairy engine with stuff like Circle, and a lot of different generators too as well. This was my first ever Rhinoceros deck, but quote-unquote Rhinoceros, because it wasn't really focusing on the game plan versus my 20-cost Rhinoceros deck, which had more success in past locals. But this was kind of the thinking process I had. I was thinking, okay, Forest has a pretty good amount of flexibility within it. It can go up to 42. And I think this is the more recommended range for a lot of your classes, usually around 40 to 43 for a majority of classes, but with stuff such as Runecraft's and Swordcraft's ability to have some consistency and possibly some other future support too as well with any of the classes, main curve can go up to possibly higher than just 40. At the moment, it's a bit tricky because 40 is pretty much a good safe spot because there are not a lot of heavy draw decks or a lot of decks that pull out some consistency factors. But the main odds is really important for my deck, for example, because I want to get some notable pieces. As you know, we have the draw engines over here, and I also want to get Rhinoceros to end the game as well. So these are just some thorough examples of how deck size could matter within it. I always say definitely go to deck log, teeter a bit, and see how it really feels for your deck size variance. Does your class want to play a lower curve, or does it want to play a potential higher curve, which is a bit more risky, but you have a lot of flexibility options. Other than that, that's been basically today's video. I would also like to give a small fourth point for my conclusion, is that there's also stuff like one-of key techs. It's a bit tricky within this meta too, so I've considered stuff like possibly adding Okami to 1, but always one-ups are a bit tricky because majority of the one-ups are very good with popping consistency engine, as I mentioned before, but also one-ups, you might not be able to see it a lot of times within the different games, so it's potential something to consider if you want to have a flexibility option. But I definitely say once there's better draw engines and such, then the one-ups will be more notable within this. And also a good point to potential hits with like the Shenlong hit possibly. If you're playing JP, you'll already experience that within playing Dragoncraft, or the upcoming Uemusume hits too. Those are more so the one-ups usage, but you can consider playing one-ups as well within your decks. Other than that, that's been pretty much it. Thank you all for watching within another episode of Rikka's Theory Crafting. Continue to embrace the darkness, and we will see you all in the next video.